All right. We are live here on episode 3 of Axe to Grind. So that pun is actually better than I initially realized because, of course, the game is now ACKS II. So it's ACKS II Grind. I might change it up and be like ACKS II Grind in the title. I think that might be clever. I don't know. Still thinking about it. Anyway, it's my first day back streaming and living since being sick with COVID. Hits like a freight train if you've never had it. So that was not good fun for the last. Excuse me. I took a bunch of cough suppressant and Advil, so I think I'm going to be able to power through. But if I have the occasional cough, I apologize. Anyway, everyone, I'm here tonight with my friend Jonathan Oldenburg. Jonathan and I have been friends for 30 years. We met at West Point in, I think, the first week of classes.
First day of class, first class.
First day of class, first, yes, right. And we went and played in the War Games Club, and just have been friends ever since. So, Jonathan, welcome to Axe to Grind.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Those of you who've watched The Grey Brotherhood will know that Jonathan is the player of Andravis. He has been continuing a 30-year tradition of having absolutely terrible luck. He was renowned for it at West Point, and his characters met terrible ends, and he has continued that tradition into the Grey Brotherhood. Yeah. So
no friendly fire death this time.
No, that's right. That's right. That was the glorious death of Gunther
Yes.
at the end of our Ravenloft campaign back in the day. So Jonathan is the author of a novel called Tears from Iron. Autark actually publishes Tears from Iron. It's available on Amazon in softcover, in Kindle, and now in audiobook. And to celebrate the fact that it's available on audiobook is kind of why we're doing this stream tonight. Because I did some market research, and it turns out that audiobooks are largely purchased by men. Men really like audiobooks, and men would really like Jonathan's book. And so I thought I could bring those groups together. So let me bring live actually to the stage here. Yeah, so there you can see it. Tears from Iron, Memories of the Cataclysm, Book 1. Jonathan Oldenburg. Cover is by Michael Siragos. That's how you know it's been published by Autark. And as you can see, it's very well reviewed. It's got 4.5 stars. I think like one guy review bombed it because he saw it was published by Autark, so fuck that guy. Anyway, no, we didn't bring an audio sample because we don't have that much foresight and intelligence. That's totally my fault. But
if you like, I could read part of it, but that's about the best we can do.
Yeah. So my brother actually just finished Tears from Iron. He quite liked it. So it was a good book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about
Thanks,
the
Willie.
world, the series? What's the TLDR here?
Sure. That's right. I always have to think about. I'm not in the acronym world. I'm still stuck 30 years back at West Point.
Too long, didn't read it.
Too long, didn't read. Yes, I got there. Basically, Tears from Iron is a story focused on a world racked by cataclysm. We can delve into that more if you like. I love talking about cataclysms. But basically, it's in midst of this chaos and ruin. There is a long-lived civilization, kind of like basically the elves. They're called the Sirastari, who are the only group of people who have managed to retain knowledge and wisdom and whatnot from the time that came before. To put it in ACKS terms, they remember the day without night, or the time before the day without night would be a way to put it. Everyone else is back in the Stone Age. And so what they've done, they're very small, but they're very small in numbers. They don't breed very fast. And so what they've done is they've co-opted humans to help their civilization survive. And the main character, Vistus, is a warrior brother. He's sworn to their service. He has been the champion defending them from the hordes of humans who are trying to survive and take what they can from this one last bastion of hope. And so he's the main character, and he is actually sent in to infiltrate these bands to try to figure out how to defeat them. And while he's doing that, he discovers various truths along the way and comes up with interesting challenges. There's some things revealed about him which are interesting. And then there's the whole backstory of inside the empire itself, not all is well either. There are some conspiracies and whatnot, and that focuses around ancient female warrior by the name of Nanana, who is about 4,000 years old, and so she has to grapple and navigate with those, and the two come together occasionally throughout the story, and then at the end to what I think you described as one of the best epic conclusions you've read in a story in a long time, or I think that's how you worded
Yeah,
it.
the ending is absolutely stellar. The payoff is very, very, very high at the ending. I really loved it. Yeah, a couple of interesting things that stood out to me as I read it, coming from an ACKS perspective, is that humans are basically the beast men of your world, right? Like
That's
they're
true.
they run around, they breed really fast, they're kind of stupid, and the one ruling civilization that has its shit together has co-opted them as their warriors. And so, like, you have basically the hobgoblin humans that Vistus is part of, and then you have like the more crazy orc-like humans. So for those of you who are planning to back before all others because you are elven supremacists, right? If you are an elven supremacist who understands what the true master race is, you must get Tears from Iron, obviously. Okay, so Omen Owl asks, who read it in audiobook? So that's interesting because what happened was Amazon approached us and said, and this of course never happens to me. They were like, "Hey, we really like you, Autark. We'd like you to participate in a new experimental audiobook program where we'll have like an Amazon AI read your book." And so we were like, "Wow, that's really cool. We're actually getting invited to like cool beta programs. Nobody ever is nice to me." And so I said yes. And so then we had the AI read it, and then Jonathan was like, "Oh no, 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 no." And and he literally went through the whole book and uh basically retyped it phonetically so that the AI would pronounce everything correctly and put in little extra commas to get it paused correctly, and just spent weeks and weeks and weeks working on it to the point where we probably should have just hired someone to read it. But anyway, but AI is making our lives easier. And so then we brought the book live to Amazon, and Amazon said, "Oh, sorry, we've rejected your audio book."
Yes, we're supposed to live stream last week. Oh well.
Yep. Yep. So I call Amazon customer service and I'm like, "Hi, you guys invited us into the Amazon beta for audiobooks, but now you've rejected us." And the person's like, they're like, "Oh, I see that you've been your book has been rejected." And I'm like, "Yes, that's what I said when I called you." It seems here that the audiobook team has rejected your book. Well, that would make sense. They were the ones that were reviewing it. I'm going to have to escalate this. So then, it got escalated and it got escalated. And finally, after 3 escalations, they were like, "Yeah, we're really sorry." And then they approved the book. So voila, it is available today. So, yeah. So they managed to take away all my good feelings I had.
To be fair though, as far as the whole editing thing goes, I don't care if you pronounce the names wrong. I'm one of those people who I'm more than happy to pronounce names wrong. I know that Robert Jordan had crazy pronunciations for some of his names, or I just did it wrong. I always called it Egwene instead of Egwin because that sounds
Yep.
nicer to
Yep.
me. And so, if you call Vistus Baistus, I don't care. But for the audiobook, I wanted to make sure the sounds were correct because I want a quality product. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I just realized I'm pronouncing some of my own axe stuff incorrectly. Like, it turns out that Cipheron is actually Kipheron.
oh, it's dangerous too. I mean, I listen to like when I do editing. One thing I've realized actually since I published this book is that one of the best ways to edit is to actually put it into text to speech and listen to it. And listening to that, if I don't do the manual changes, I begin thinking about my characters' names being the wrong pronunciation because it
Yeah,
doesn't say them right, and it really
absolutely.
messes with me sometimes. But
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a pitfall.
It should
Yeah.
be. I think it's like the equivalent of Kindle Unlimited, um, for Audible. It's $3.99. But if you have an audiobook membership with Audible, it should be free for you. But otherwise, it'll be $3.99. So, all right. So let's talk Cataclysm, right? Because I have my own world. The Arn Empire is pre-Cataclysm, right? Like the cataclysm is imminent. You can see that it's coming. It's not quite here yet. It's looming. Things are going downhill. Now, and then we have a lot of worlds where it's like the cataclysm has happened long ago and civilization is rebuilt. Yours is, oh shit, the cataclysm is happening kind of right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always loved cataclysms. In fact, and part of my biggest regret is I didn't set it more in the middle of the cataclysm. I think I might have to write a book
Like
further
a
in.
prequel.
But I wanted an established empire, and for it to work for the Surastari, it had to be late cataclysm when they could actually get stable enough to build cities. So I kind of was forced by plot to do that. But yeah, I've always loved the idea of these cataclysms. Tolkien had his the First Age.
Mm-hmm.
When frankly, I mean, I'll be honest, Silmarillion is my favorite book. It's the best book
Great.
ever, best work of fantasy ever written.
Yeah.
And so you'll definitely see some inspirations probably from there in what I do. But I've always loved the First Age. I love that idea of what came before. Jordan had his breaking. Those have always fascinated me. And so when I was thinking about what story do I want to tell in this world, because the world long predates this project, I was like, I want to write a story in the Cataclysm, and to see what life would actually be like when everything just goes to ruin. When everybody, I mean, because my cataclysm, just to clarify, is it's well, they don't know how long it is. Even the Sirastari don't really know how long it is because they weren't. Time doesn't matter that much when you're that long
Long lived.
lived,
Yeah.
and also when you're busy. And so they didn't necessarily track the years as well as they should. They estimated probably about 1,000, 1,200 years. I actually plotted out plate tectonic movements. I tried to do some research, and so I actually have on my map in my office, I have up the different stages of about 12 stages of the cataclysm to track the different movement of these plates. And because like Alex, I'm a simulationist. I think we arrived at that separately because
Yeah.
I've been doing simulation for well since I started this 25 years ago, and you've been doing simulation probably even longer than that. I don't know,
About the
but
same.
yeah, and so we both believe maybe it's because we're history majors. I don't know, but we both um, love the idea of a world that is alive. I've always likened it to, you see those old cowboy westerns where somebody's walking down the street and you see the different buildings on each side, and you just know that if they turn to the left or they turn to the right, you're just going to see it's a cutout. And I hate the idea of the cutout. I want there to be something beyond the building, something beyond the horizon. And you don't
Amen.
necessarily have to show that in the book, but if you have it there, the way you write conveys that message through like between the lines. And so I think the readers know if there's a world out there or if there isn't one. Um, so yeah, I may have rambled off topic there,
No,
but
that was great. That was great. That actually reminds. So mentioning the maps. So you're working on the sequel now, and
yeah,
one of the things I loved is that you've been able to actually use ACKS to help you write the sequel. Right? Like you sent me the screenshots. You did the whole battle finale of the sequel. You like tested it out in Domains at War, right?
yeah. Let me see if I can find it. I can maybe do a screen share
So
of that.
that was pretty
Um,
cool.
yeah,
Um,
that happened fairly late in the process. I should have done that sooner. I didn't get distracted and forget. You can remind me. Because for a while there, I was just kind of doing my own story. So teaser on the next one is set 500 years later. By this point, the cataclysm is basically ended. It is now memories of the cataclysm as opposed to some memory. And so it's set once again with the Sirastari people, and now they've found their ancient enemy, the Hirastari, um, which they basically well they call them the Ternastari. So the Hira. Maybe I should give some back. We got the whole classic many of the classic fantasy tropes, but also with a Jonathonian twist. So the Sirastari are actually they call the Sirastari means true Astari, but they're called by their enemies the Finastari, which means dark Astari. So anybody who
mm,
knows fantasy tropes knows they're the dark elves. Um, so maybe their empire isn't perfect. I don't know. And their enemies are the Hirastari, the high elves, or the Ternastari, which means bound elves. And so the idea is that long ago there was an oath which bound these two people together, and the Sirastari rejected the oath, and the Hirastari kept the oath, and it caused this massive schism, bloodshed, blood feud going on for over 1,000 years now. And they find each other again during the Cataclysm, and now they're at war again. And so the story takes place with the prince of the ruler of this empire, who's a young lad of only about 100 years, leading an army across the water. Um, and various things happen where he ends up having to march home. It's a classic, you know, stranded army story. I have a friend of mine here who's my alpha reader, my primary alpha reader, my brainstormer back here. He's like, you know what, Jonathan, you tell a good stranded army story. I'm
Yeah.
like, all right, let's do this. I was looking because my idea is I want to tell 3 stories. This one, Tears from Iron, is the beginning of the Sarastari Empire. The next one is the middle, and then I want to write one about the fall. And so my original idea for the series title was Rise and Fall of the Sarastari Empire, kind of a doff your hat to Rome or the Nazis, kind of that thing. And Alex was like, yeah, that probably won't sell so well. Let's come up with something a little more lively. And so we came up with Memories of the Cataclysm. But anyway, along that march, I had to do all sorts of calculating. And so on my own, I calculated logistics to make sure that I had tracking water and food and how they're gathering all that kind of stuff. I don't bore the reader with it, but it informs the story
Right.
because if food becomes a problem, what do you do about it? And so you realize you have to go raid and collect food, and that causes the populace to get upset, and all those different kind of ramifications. And so for a while there, I was doing a lot of my own math when I probably should have just turned to ACKS. So it was late in the series. I'm working on the final act now, and I was working on the final battle. I haven't actually written that part yet, but I'm prepping to write the final outcome. And I'm thinking to myself, I should try fighting this battle out on Domains at War. And so that's what I did. And so I'll see if I can find it.
Um, yeah. Yeah. The idea that you mentioned of the Western with like the cutouts, right? So that's the same approach I take with game design. Like, I don't think a lot of people actually cared that much exactly what the pricing was for like olive trees and, peasant farms and the number of cows they had. But I think on some level they really like knowing that it's there, because then it makes it sort of that much more real when they conquer the peasants or whatnot. Um, Although, as always, you do get people like if it's there, there are people who become obsessed with it, and which is something that's very funny for me. As I often get asked, like, why did you create an economics simulator? I'm like, I didn't. It's not an economics simulator. It's just the economics is just there so you can run the war. Likewise, like your book isn't about logistics, but you did the logistics so that the military marching. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So.
exactly.
All right. So I'm looking forward to the Netflix adaptation in which the armies will just teleport randomly around the map at an arbitrary speed of plot.
I shared it. I've shared it. So if you want to bring that up,
Yeah, here it
this
is.
is one of the point. This is round 5. You got the lost units on the upper right,
Yeah.
and the initiative on the left, and all that kind of thing. And I designed the little tiles. I do this. I'm a crazy person. I'm old school. I do this in PowerPoint. You probably think I'm bad. I'm very
Wow.
familiar with PowerPoint, and I feel very comfortable in it. So I did it in PowerPoint, and I use Excel for
Wow.
some of the tracking. And yeah, no, I just played it out turn by turn, and I use different symbols to mark, whether
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
shielded, I think is the right term, or all
Ready,
those different kinds of
defend,
things. Ready,
undefend,
yeah.
etc. Yeah.
So,
That's awesome.
um,
That's awesome.
but yeah,
Yeah. I know you don't want to share the whole thing because you don't want to give spoilers for the book, but yeah, but those of you who are watching, I can attest that we did go through, and I did go through, and the whole battle was fought out. It was pretty neat. It's pretty neat for sure.
yeah. And I checked some numbers. I wanted a phalanx because one side is low on manpower, and they need to really quickly muster up some peasants, basically. And I actually emailed Alex. It's like, I think this is possible. How long do you think it would take to train peasants? And he's like, check ACKS. It says.
It's true. It's true. It's all
and
there.
then and then you showed me, oh yeah, there's phalanx rules and Domains at War, and so I put those together, and so we got the phalanxes are the ones on the far, I guess the army's far left flank, and they're moving slowly, and those guys are beasts, I gotta
They
tell you.
are.
But
They are beasts. Yeah.
and it is amazing how quickly you can train phalanxes. It's like only a few months to get them basic
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah.
And so anyway,
Yeah. Well, you think about it, like a lot of wars are basically fought by people that only have a few months of basic training, you know. And the way you fight when that's what you've got is going to be really different than if you're like, we have men that were born to the saddle and can shoot a composite bow at a range of 300, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, I've actually read theories that Rome was actually that way. The reason Rome survived was because they were not your born to war culture.
Right.
They're kind of similar to us, I suppose, but they're facing all these groups which are born to war.
Right.
The Gauls in particular early on, and the various Latin tribes in Italy early
The
on.
Samnites and all those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but their skill was they learned how to drill and train and fight in these foot formations, and one of the authors I read actually argues that didn't actually make them stronger. Look at how many times they lost. What it made was gave them parity, and their strength was their ability to replace their losses.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, or to have cities that couldn't be besieged and things like that. I'm way oversimplifying that, but
Of course. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's a
I mean,
really interesting concept in looking at history and how that interrelates.
I mean, you and I, of course, were born to war. That's why we went to West Point.
Unless you look at our physical grades.
Until you look at our physical grades, and they were like, Okay, so Jonathan, I'm curious, right? So when I left, my class rank was something like this, right? So I was something like 50th academically. I was about 600th militarily, and I was, I think, 916 physically. Do you remember where your rank ended up?
Roughly. I wasn't quite as brilliant as you, although to be fair, I have some theories on also some of the challenges of academia at West Point. But also, I don't think I'm as brilliant as you. I'll tip my hat. I think I was around 200th when I graduated, and militarily I was probably below half, so probably 500 or 600. I blame that on the military structure again. They had the scoring structure where if there were, like, for the first 2 years, oftentimes there were two of you in your class in a squad. And if there were two of you, one of you got the A and one of you got the B. If there were
Mhm,
three of you, one of you got an A, one of you got a B, and one of you got a C. I'm
mhm,
not super gung ho. I'm not hoo-ah. I'm going to spend 20 hours shining my shoes. It's probably another
mhm.
military deficiency on my part. So so regardless, I was always in a three-man squad,
Oh,
almost always in a three-man squad,
brutal.
and so I almost always got the C. And it's like, that's not fair. But anyway, so I think my military grade is slightly deflated. But yeah,
Yeah.
my physical grade was towards the bottom. I don't know how low it was.
Oh,
And
but
I
was
ended
it
up
as low as mine, is what I'm
I
asking.
doubt it. I mean,
Because mine was really low.
I
Like,
did almost fail the physical fitness test my plebe year.
yeah.
I was on the last string to figuring out how to do it, and it ended up ironically being tactics. That was so
Oh,
tactics wins the day.
nice.
How to approach the physical methodology. So
I passed
um,
because of Sean. Sean actually, like, decided he was gonna be my personal trainer, and he took me out running and working out. So,
that's one thing they really did have a
he
good
was a
culture
jock,
was
he
yeah.
was yeah.
And mine was Rob. Remember Rob, my team leader? You knew him.
Yeah,
He was a
yeah.
gamer.
I remember
And,
Rob.
yeah, he took me under the wing, and we figured out we used clicker boards back then for push-ups, and it was the
Yep.
push-ups that got me. I've always been good at running. I've done decent on sit-ups, so it was push-ups that got me,
Right.
and it was the clicker board. And he was like, "Stop trying to use the standard tactic of lowering yourself down and using the muscle weight to roll yourself down. Just bounce off that thing." And so that's what I
Right.
did, and a
Right.
few other tactics than that. But, yeah,
Right.
so, main point though is I got the branch I wanted, which was armor, and,
Right.
so it was good enough grade.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I had the most trouble with the push-ups and the sit-ups and the running.
So what did you do well with?
I mean, I didn't do okay, I actually did. I got one the whole time I was there, I got one grade in gym that wasn't a D or an F. So I got an F in gymnastics, I got
Yep,
a D in boxing, I
yep.
got a D in wrestling or whatever. I got a B in swimming. I was a good swimmer.
Yeah, I don't remember I got in wrestling, but my boxing and my gymnastics were the same, and I did well in swimming.
Yeah.
So
I mean, with boxing, the problem was I have 2400 vision, right? So, take my glasses off me, and I basically, if you're across the boxing room, boxing ring for me, you're like 400 feet away from me in terms of my accuracy in punching you. And they wouldn't let you wear contacts. Obviously, you couldn't wear glasses, and so it
Yeah,
was like
I was contact wearer, and so I was just as blind as you were. It was terrible.
you're just totally blind in the ring, and then and of course you're like, hey, so and so, your classmate was a Golden Gloves winner in New York as an amateur boxer. And I'm like, oh, that's great. I'm so excited that my 2400 vision is being paired with him. This is going to be an exciting match. And after the concussion, I realized I probably was not going to pass boxing. So,
You got a D though. So
I did. The way I got the D was on my very last match. I put my contacts in without telling them, and I figured I would risk the retinal scratch to be able to stay in the academy. And the poor guy that because it was like the round robin, right? The poor guy that I was up against was like thought he was going to have a chump of a fight because I hadn't landed a punch on anybody, and then all of a sudden I was like a lethal weapon. I could actually see you, and so I won that one bout.
I may have done slightly better, but I didn't win any because I was told my rights were pretty weak, but I had a pretty good. I'm sorry, my left jab was really weak, but I had a decent right, so they were a little bit. They were worried my right. The main thing I'm proud of is they never knocked me down.
Oh, really? I got knocked down. Blood everywhere, like fountains coming out of my nose, concussion, everything.
Oh,
I'm
brutal.
surprised they let you in at all with 2400 vision. So I actually got a health waiver for my vision and for my scoliosis. So
Your vision might have been. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was really bad. Yeah. So they got me a health waiver because when they were recruiting me, they said they really wanted people with strong academics, but that turned out to less be the case than I had hoped.
Yeah, I think mine was only 2,200 at the time, so but I needed a health waiver for my feet. I have flat feet, so all
You
that
also
standing
got a health waiver.
information.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was that almost made me not get in, and so there was a lot
Really?
of scrambling and
Yep.
to make all that. So
Yep.
yeah,
Yep. But you stayed in. I mean, you actually served. You were an armor
Yep.
officer.
Hooah!
That's right. Fort Hood, as I recall, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought I was going to be a general, and I decided, well, I love the Army theory. If they would have let me be a staff officer,
Mm-hmm.
the way the military works as an officer is you bounce between command and staff. So you're like a platoon leader, then you become the executive officer for a company. Then you become a company commander. I'm sorry. Well, then you might do some staff time. Then you become a company commander. Then you do some more staff time. Then you become a battalion commander. Do more staff time. I love staff. I was really good at it. I have a staff mind. You see my PowerPoints, my power,
For sure.
and all that kind of stuff. And I think I have a pretty good sound mind for tactics and things like that. So I love staff. I did not enjoy command.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I could have stayed staff, I would have stayed in. But,
they had the superior Wehrmacht system where you had the general staff officers instead, right? Then you
don't say I didn't think about that.
I know, of course. Absolutely. So, yeah, Jonathan always played the Germans and the Prussians and whatnot in any of our war games. Actually, and then you also played the Welsh, as I recall.
Oh, I love the Welsh. Yeah, I love the outsiders. The Welsh and the Finns have always fascinated me, and now I'm getting interested in the Ethiopians. Are really interesting. I've just dabbled a little bit in them, but I'd like to learn more about them. But yeah, I love the Welsh. This year.
So Thane says, my son is going through the admission process for the Coast Guard Academy.
Oh, awesome.
There this summer. That's awesome. We're pulling for him. Awesome. I've actually, in retrospect, many years later, I've often reflected that I think I probably would have been better off in the Navy or Coast Guard than I was in the Army. Just by temperamentally speaking, or the Air Force or something. But yeah, very much good luck to your son. It's
I think we had some Coast Guard cadets come to our PointCon, our gaming convention, didn't we?
We did. They used to come to PointCon. That's right.
Yeah, they're up in Rhode Island. I want to say I'm showing my age and my rustiness, but I think that's where they're.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome.
That's really cool. I mean, getting into the academies, even though I dropped out, I still consider getting in to be one of the great honors of my life. So
that and single-handedly running our gaming convention the first year. You were like right.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. That was pretty.
He was called Master of the Game back then, which I think is where Arbiter of Worlds came from. I think that's
Well, Master of the Game was a Gary Gygax book. That's where that title came from.
Oh, was it?
Yep. So
Oh,
then I
okay.
did Arbiter of Worlds because I wanted something similar, but couldn't do
Right.
that. That had been Gary Gygax's book. Yeah. Yeah. So we
Yeah.
used to have a game convention at West Point called Point Con, and so I helped run and set up Point Con in the years I was there, and and then I went back for several years thereafter. For I think 3 years thereafter, I made it after I left as well. We had
Yep.
that was a great time. I should do an ACKS Con. Would people come to ACKS Con? What do we think?
I'd come.
You would come, right? Totally.
Oh yeah.
We could have like invite all the people running acts to come be GMs, and we could do some ascendant sessions. We could have some panels, you know. Yeah, that would be good. Depends where, well, I mean, I think I would have to be where I live in Raleigh, Durham, because I couldn't organize one you know, across the universe, but like I could do it at the Durham Convention Center or something. It's not very expensive. So, we did Escapist Expo at the Durham Convention Center, so I'm familiar with the venue. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
that'd be cool.
all right. So let's talk a little bit about Jonathan. Let's talk a little bit about the state of escapist entertainment right now. So,
I think I've been largely escaping entertainment right. No, but we'll see. We'll see how I do. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So when you want to read a good fantasy novel these days, who do you read?
I read somebody who was writing 20 or 30 years ago or more.
Really?
I've largely given up on modern
You
fantasy.
have? Yeah.
Um, Most recent one, well, no, I won't necessarily say that. Yeah, probably about. There's probably. I was trying to figure out. I think just to get some tips on good book openers and some other kinds of thoughts like that. Because how do you begin a story? That's one of the biggest challenges. Because you gotta gather that interest, but you also there's a certain bedrock you have to make to a story.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go too fast. You can't go too slow. If you go too fast, then people don't have a clue what's going on, or they
Right.
aren't invested. In my first draft of my first book, I had the main character and his brother are traveling up a hill and they get ambushed by some monsters, and his brother gets killed, and it's a tragic scene. But comments I got from readers was, "I'm not invested enough. I don't
I
care that
don't
he's lost
care.
his brother." Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's the challenge on the one side. The other side is these days, with the 1 minute short or shorter generation. How do you if you spend too long on that wind up? And sometimes I worry that Tears from Iron may have too slow of a wind up. I'm not sure. Um, it's worth it though if you find it slow as a startup. Go through.
I mean, I would say relative to a lot of other fiction that's being written today, I would say Tears from Iron has a relatively slow start
Yeah.
compared to particularly like the sort of books that, are often being, book 18 of this Kindle Unlimited best-selling series type stuff. But I think a slow pace is justified when there's a payoff, and Tears for Iron pays off really dramatically, like jaw-dropping, epic last couple chapters. So I think, but what's happened is so many people are bad writers, and so that starts off slow, not because they're building someplace, but just because they're bad at pacing. And so you're like, wow, I read 500 pages and nothing happened. That's eventually what happened to Robert Jordan, right? Like book 8, book 9, somewhere like
Yeah, I loved his books, but he lost his way.
he lost his
Um,
way. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I would love to read him again, but I just don't think I can handle it.
I can't
It's
do it.
just
I used to every time a
yeah.
new one came out, I used to
Yep.
reread the whole series, and then one day I was like, "This is dumb. I'm not doing this anymore."
I did that through
So,
about eight of his books, and I've read all of them. I finished the series. But yeah, so anyway, so I went and I read, I don't know, 20 books in 30 days or something like that. I
oh
said
wow.
I'm gonna read the first 50 pages.
Ah, okay.
And it's it's actually it's depressing, all these ones that get picked up by big publishers, and they're
Yeah.
just not that good. There were a few books that I found that I enjoyed. There's I think 2 that I actually finished later
Mhm.
on.
Mhm.
But for the most part, um, I just struggle with it. I mean, the quality of writing, the writing I like, uh, is the older stuff. So I would say if I had to classify myself, I'd call myself uh, uh, a neo-classic fantasy writer.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
try to capture the magic of your Tolkien. My biggest influences would be Tolkien,
Mhm.
Lloyd Alexander,
Mhm.
and Robert Jordan, or at least his early ones. Um, and so I try to capture that. But one of those things that those books didn't necessarily capture as much that I love and it's not a slight on them. Tolkien is the master,
Right.
but
Obviously.
Tolkien didn't bring you down into the person like I
Right.
like to. I want you to be with the person, to feel what they're feeling, to experience what they're feeling.
Right.
And so that's the more new side of things that I want to do. And so I have the epic scale, the grandeur, the nobility of the, trying to capture all of that you
Hmm.
see with the old work, and then mesh it with the intensity that you see with
Right.
some of the newer books.
The interiority of getting into the
Yes.
head. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which you don't really see much of in Tolkien.
And I know you got a comment to say there, but before we go on, I will say that that is the magic of role playing games for me. Prior to West Point, I had never played a role playing game. I was a board war gamer. I played Avalon Hill.
Yep.
For those of
Yep.
you who are old enough to remember Avalon Hill, Squad Leader was my main staple, but there were a bunch of other ones I played as well. And so, yeah, a plebe year at West Point, we're hanging out in the War Games Club, and you're like, I'm
Yep.
going to start off a Ravenloft campaign. You want to play? And I
Right.
was, as you know, I'm Christian, and so I kind of grew up in that scare
Right.
kind
Right.
of world, and I'm like, I don't know. I had read a few of the Dark Secret. I'd read a few of the Choose Your Own Adventure
Yep.
Dungeons
Yep.
and Dragons books, and
Yep.
I enjoyed those. And so I'm like, I'm not sure. And you're like, you know what? Give it a try. And if you have any problems with it, step away. I respect that. But don't judge until you take a look. And I was like, okay, let's do this. And that's been gaming ever since. But
And of
the
course,
magic,
Nate rolls in with the Inquisitor. Don't question the faith.
but he didn't play it in an evil way. He
No,
he
he
was
did. He
he
was
played a
great.
legitimate. Yeah, he
Yeah.
was so good. Um, but the magic there is, I think, prior to West Point, I already love world building. I've been world building since seventh grade.
Yeah.
The tangent there. I love tangents. Seventh grade, we had a geography assignment in history class.
Uh-huh.
One was draw a map of the world, and then the other one was make up your own map, and you have to include these various geographical features like isthmus,
Right.
peninsula, what have you, delta, and those kinds of things. So I drew a map, and in seventh grade, I was coming up with chronology of kings and this
Oh,
kind
that's
of stuff, writing
awesome.
history. And I actually broke that out when I was thinking about writing a book, and I'm like, it was on an island chain. It was too restrictive, and so I set it aside. But I considered it briefly,
That's awesome.
and but from that, so I developed a love of history and that world building from an early age. But it was West Point with the role playing games that I really began to enjoy character. Now, spoiler: when I play games, I feel like with Andravis, I am not the best role player. It's a very different environment role playing a character than writing a character, because when you're
Truth.
writing, you
Truth.
have control over everything, and you're also not worried about character death. You're not being driven by those different kinds of things.
Right.
Although I think the will penalty with Andravis actually helped me in the long run, because now I'm like, I don't care. Let's go charge the ghouls.
Right. 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 Right.
Oh, spoiler. But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Oof. Um, the poor Grey Brotherhood. They're so long suffering. So long suffering, man.
That's why our color is gray.
Yeah, that's right. The color of death. Um, oh yeah, God, so many crazy memories. So many crazy memories. So I didn't get as into world building, I think, as early as you. But I was into role playing games obviously much earlier because my brother taught me when I was very young. I was like 5 or 6 when I first started playing, and then Willie, when he went to college, left me a bunch of his Dungeons and Dragons books. He had discovered something called girls or beer or something. I don't quite know what he was doing in college, but anyway, he left me his books. I was really thankful for that. And but for the most part, early on, I usually ran in like the established setting, right? So like we played in Ravenloft, we played in Night City by R. Talsorian was the other, the
Did
other.
a brief Vikings campaign. Remember that one?
We did a Vikings
Yeah.
campaign. Yeah, it ended after like one session because it was too
No,
depressing.
it made a little while, but it got depressing there.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
rough.
yeah,
Ragnarok.
yeah,
Cataclysm.
yeah. That's right. That's right. That's right. That was rough. Yeah. Yeah, well, the West Point was a depressing place, so like it was tough to run a really depressing Viking campaign. It was so depressing. People were like, "Man, I'd rather be in formation."
So depressed is like I'd rather a cyberpunk campaign.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right.
That actually was my favorite. I think Newton from the Grey Brothers, he ran an awesome Mechton campaign where
That's
Alex
right.
died in a horrible fiery death.
Glorious,
Um,
glorious death.
glorious. Okay, glorious fiery death. How about that?
Thank you.
But that was a fantastic game. And then the other one that I really loved was the cyberpunk campaign. Those were the best too.
That was
But
that was good fun. Yeah. I've actually never survived a campaign. Like
I've heard that.
literally in my entire life, I have never had my starting character survive till the end of the campaign. I always die, but in glorious ways, so it's okay. It's okay.
That's the important thing. Hence the heroic funeral rules. Yeah, you got to die gloriously.
Exactly correct. That's why there's heroic funeral rules. Yeah. So one of the guys on the ACKS server, Unshaven, ran a BattleTech campaign. And so he asked me to play the villain in the BattleTech campaign. So I was like the commander of the enemy forces. And I was like, dude, this is so great. And I'd love to, I'll do it. I just want to let you know, like, I always die, right? And he's like, no, come on, it'll be fine. So, so we do the campaign, and at first things are going like swimmingly for me. I completely outmaneuver the players. They've been cut off. They're out of supply. I've encircled them. I'm about to capture the town. So then we go to actually do the capture of the town that'll win me the game, and the opening round of the fight, it's just a freak critical, and the commander gets killed with a shot to the cockpit. And Unshaven is like, what the hell just happened to my campaign? I'm like, I told you, man, I always die.
Maybe you're living up to the Alexander the Great thing, because he was always charging at the front of battle, and that's how he ended up dying, if I recall. Wasn't it? Didn't he? Was it from? Well, I know it was longer term, but wasn't it wounds from?
Yeah, he
like,
accumulated a
scaling
lot of
wall?
wounds. Yeah, a
And
lot. It was the one to the chest, the arrow to the chest is the one, I think.
yeah,
Yeah. Although some believe that he was treacherously poisoned by Antipater and his cohorts.
there's always treachery in those old stories.
Always treachery. Is there treachery in your books, Jonathan?
Yes.
Yeah, there is. There's a lot of treachery.
There's a lot of treachery.
Yeah, because they're all elves, right?
In fact, it probably should be called Treachery from Iron. I don't know. I'm just thinking about there is so much betrayal in that book.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's really important to me in storytelling is, and actually was a conversation. Well, I sort of alluded to this in the conversation over the weekend on one of the channels on Discord. I think. No, actually, well, maybe not. Anyway, one of the things that's important to me is I don't like random character death. Somebody gets hit by a bus. It really bugs me. Actually, yeah, we did talk about that a little bit. That's why I stopped reading Erickson. I loved Eric. He was inscrutable, which I really struggled with. But the game ender for me was, and it was random character death. Now I want to, as I said on that channel, I didn't feel like it was a betrayal of the author's promise. He's very clearly telling a story where characters can randomly die.
Right.
But I only have a certain level of tolerance for that.
Right.
Same thing with George R.R. Martin. I stopped with the Red Wedding. It's like I just can't take any more random character death.
Yeah.
It was important. As I understand, it was significant for the future of this series. But for me, when I read a book, when I write a book, I bond with the characters. The character is the story for me, and so that's. I want to understand and see their lives. I want to, feel what they feel, go through what they feel, and I get attached to them. And so if they're always just dying off, that really bothers me. Now, that being said, I have no problem with killing characters. In fact, a few months ago, I was looking through my table, my dramatis personae, I think is how you pronounce that.
I've never known how to pronounce it.
Yeah. If you know how to pronounce it, tell us. But anyway, 1/3 of those characters die.
Right.
So there is a lot of character death, but every single death in the stories is meaningful. And that, to me, goes to the importance of fantasy, and how I view it. I mean, there's many different, as you say, with games. There's lots of games for different kinds of people. There's lots of fantasy books for different kinds of people. And for me, the idea of fantasy is to portray the possibility to be awesome, to be heroic, and that when bad things happen, there can still be something good out of it. There's hope even amidst the destruction.
Right.
So I have no problem with killing off characters, and I kill off a lot of characters. But I want them to die in meaningful, significant ways where you go, oh yeah, unless they're a baddie, and then sometimes you just go, yes.
Yeah.
That's
right.
But that's a very important part of my storytelling process, is how you handle that death.
Right.
And,
right. Yeah, I think George R.R. Martin, the frustrating thing about him is that he is functionally nihilistic. And so, but he's writing a fantasy world which literally has, the Night King and the evil undead and the Lord of Light and all of the stuff that's straight out of like black and white fantasy. And and he never resolves that disparity, right? Like, it can't be the case that life is meaningless and there's no purpose and nothingness when you literally have the priests of the Lord of Light can raise the dead, right? He never squares that circle. And so it's like it's both a world building error, I think, and also It's as if he just goes out of his way to be nihilistic and make things meaningless. And then we get to R. Scott Baker, who I really liked his first trilogy. And then his second trilogy, he was like, wait a minute. Did you like my first trilogy? Because I've written this next series of books just to say fuck you. And then he like retroactively went back in time to make me dislike the first books, and like appeared to me in the past and was like, oh, you like these books? You like these books? They suck. So, yeah.
Yeah, I read the first one or two, I don't remember why I didn't continue. Honestly, I forget. And all inclination to continue has been destroyed by your commentary on how it goes. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, don't continue. Forget
Um,
it. Forget it.
Yeah, I wish I remembered why I stopped. I think it was decent, but for some reason it didn't capture me entirely. I
I
don't
think
know.
there was there's a really brutal rape scene in the second
Oh
book.
yeah, those things get to me.
Yeah.
The same reason I tried, what's that, the White Gold books or something like that?
Oh,
There's
yep.
this
Yeah.
rapist
Yeah.
running around, and I don't know. It was just, it didn't jive with my
Right. White
moral
Gold Wielder.
compass.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's why
Yeah.
there's different books for different people. So
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And I don't mind a book that has villains doing villainous things.
yeah,
I'm less enthralled when it's the hero doing villainous things. Right.
yeah. And I don't necessarily need to see it in graphic detail. That's the other thing that George R. R. Martin did a lot of. Is
Right. He does.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with killing people, but don't revel in it. Friend circuses.
Yeah, definitely don't revel in. All right, I admit I like a little bit of reveling. I think I have a higher tolerance for gore and bloodshed and stuff like that than you do.
Fair.
Yeah, I didn't. So my brother says I didn't like the arbitrary cruelty of almost all the characters. I agree. It's really off-putting. It's really off-putting. And people are like, oh, it's such realistic world building. No, it's not, right? Because in the real world couldn't function if every single person in it was a sociopath who acted like a malicious asshole all the time, right? Like feudalism only worked because there actually were men who would take their oaths seriously and die for the king, right? If nobody takes chivalry seriously, if nobody's willing to be the king, the system doesn't work. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I was gonna say, yeah, I suspect maybe the motivation there, of course, there's the nihilism, but I suspect the motivation there was so much of everything's perfect, these la-di-da fairy tale worlds,
Right.
where everything and it's like, no, these are really gritty worlds, and in fact, I don't remember when George R. R. Martin first came out. I think it came out after I started writing.
Right.
But
at
least I was aware of it.
Oh, I remember. It was the year before law school, so 1996, I think, was the first book.
Really? Was it? Okay, maybe I just wasn't unaware of him until I was well into the writing. Anyway, and that was one thing. That's one of the balances, which is a challenge for a writer. And maybe it's in some ways it's maybe less these days because people accept more grit. Because that's only half of it. Because one of the challenges is if you want to be a world that has verisimilitude, that truly is realistic, then you're going to have all sorts of things that to the modern consciousness just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Or they just can't stand it. Like, I don't believe it. It's crazy. I remember, this is a small tangent, but I remember in this high school, I think we had to read, what was the book that everybody has to read in high school that's set in the Dust Bowl? Is that
Grapes of Wrath?
No, Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
We had to read Grapes of Wrath, and there was a scene where they talked about having a turkey shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And all my classmates were like, "What's a turkey shoot? What's a turkey shoot?" And I was already rapidly into World War II, so I'd been reading about the Mariana Turkey Shoot, which is a famous battle where late in the war, where the Japanese had lost all of their really ace pilots, and the American planes had become much more powerful than the Japanese ones, and it was just a slaughter. And I'm like, "Oh, I know what a turkey shoot is. It's when they put turkeys into boxes and then they shoot them." And everyone in the classroom was like, "No, that's impossible. They would put turkeys in pens and just shoot them. That's not fair." And I'm like, "That's the turkey shoot." And so that whole concept of the unpalatability of some of the things in the past is something you kind of have to deal with and fudge. And so there is a degree of fudge of what I think that people can handle. And also there's a degree of fudge because I don't think any of us truly understands what it was like to live 400 years ago. It's so foreign to us.
Right.
We can't grasp it.
Right. So. But that fudging can go too far, right?
Oh, that definitely.
To me, the example of where they went too far is in Star Wars, when you have the evil empire, the genocidal empire that destroys a planet with a population of billions of people just to send a political message, right? Like, far worse than any Holocaust in all of human history, done with an offhand gesture, right? And then Lucasfilm would be like, Star Wars gets its first black stormtrooper. And I'm like, why on earth would we give a shit about the racial makeup of the genocidal maniacs that just killed 6 million people? Like, why are we celebrating that? What is the thought process here, right? Like, are you saying that the Empire would be more evil if it didn't have black stormtroopers? Because I feel like it's
I would think they wouldn't want to be one of the stormtroopers. We want to be the goodies.
like it doesn't even it didn't even make sense, right? Or like Star Wars gets its first gay Grand Moff, and I'm like, I mean, what's the message here? Gay people can commit genocide against Alderaan? It made no sense to me, and I think it's because, like, in some way they can't divorce themselves from the modern mindset, and this is something I wanted to say to your earlier point. I think what separates your writing from a lot of the writing that is popular, but I don't like it very much, is that it feels like the characters all just rolled out of my local coffee shop. They just talk like modern 21st century people, and they act like modern 21st century people, and all the fantasy is just a backdrop, to people that are just, Seattle Americans of today. And I don't like that. Like, I want my dark elves to act like 4,000-year-old dark elves. They have different motivations, different belief structures, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely. I had one thought when you were talking, I lost it, but that's okay. That's terrible. But yeah, that reminds me of there's a conversation. I don't think I caught the original, but where you talked long years ago, and somebody reposted it recently about the challenge of ageless elves,
Yeah.
and how you have to either have them not be have a finite lifespan like you did in ACKS, be forgetful, or I forget what the third option was. You remember what the third?
No, I don't remember the third option. There
Anyway,
was a third option.
yeah, and so my Suristari are ageless. That would be a direct Tolkien influence.
Yeah.
I love the idea of these beings that where time is not an issue. So yeah, so one of the secondary protagonist, Ninana, she is 4,000 years old, and
Right.
so how do you portray a story with somebody who's 4,000 years old? How do you portray a society that has people? In fact, there is if you shameless teaser, if you subscribe to my Substack, which is just kicking off. I used to just do it as a newsletter on my book, but if you subscribe to my Substack, you do get a free copy of it's called A Treatise on Creation and the Lost Age, which is the background, the story behind before the Cataclysm. And I wrote that from the perspective of a Hirostari, so the other faction, a Hirostari scholar who actually was shaped and not born. So he's one of the originals who's still
Oh,
alive.
wow.
And so how do you grapple with that? And I think the answer I ultimately came up with, well, I came up with several different answers, but one of them is that memory thing. And the way I approach, and I don't really discuss that much in Tears from Iron, but there is a little bit of it in the sequel, where the idea is, how much do you remember of 20 years ago?
Right.
I mean, I recently wrote and shared with you, my
Your
memories of
memoirs.
West Point.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was forgetting things, and I was like, I don't want to forget things, and so I grabbed all the resources I could and just kind of wrote a thing for
Yeah.
you, my family, and my friends,
Which was
whatnot.
awesome. And I had forgotten so much of what was in there, and it just came back to me as you wrote it. It was fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. If you live 4,000, I mean, if 20 years ago, we've forgotten things that happened 20 years ago. If you're 4,000 years old, how much are you going to forget? And so that's half of the answer. And then the other half of the answer was I carefully plotted out. There's actually a life cycle of these Suristari that they go through. Their first years they're very human, or they're like their childhood is not that different. And then they enter this stage where they feel like they're immortals. Like, well, wait, all these other races are dying off. I'm invincible. I can rule the world. And those who make it through that stage suddenly realize, wait, well, actually, I could die.
Right.
And so they enter this maturity stage where they are much more aware, and so on and so forth. And then there's a later stage where oftentimes they give way to despair, and that's actually the main vulnerability for
Right.
the Astari peoples. This is kind of, it's inspired by Tolkien, but I think I doubled down on it,
Yeah.
in the sense that the main death of Surastari is they just give up
Yeah.
and they lay down and then they die, because I mean, I don't know about you. I'm a hopeful person. I think mostly sometimes, not so much maybe these days, but I'm generally an optimistic, hopeful person of faith. But I wouldn't want to live 4,000 years in this world. I would be tired of it.
So it's functionally a story about Canadian healthcare then.
I'm not
Physician
getting that
assisted
one.
physician assisted suicide, man. Right.
Sure.
Oh, all right. All right. Well,
Uh,
I went too dark for you. I went too dark. I feel bad.
that wasn't too dark. It was just a joke I didn't follow.
Let's talk about magic for a second because you have a
All right.
really cool magic system in Tears for Iron. And when I read it, I remember thinking you could use the spell singing rules from ACKS
Yep.
to do this magic system. So can you I know you don't want to do spoilers, but can you talk a little bit about
Oh,
the magic system?
there's no spoilers in that. In fact, maybe at one point I'll do another teaser for subscribers or something. I've actually have another treatise written by another scholar on the magic system. So there's no teasers, there's no spoilers in magic. Although for this is actually a kind of a fun flashback too. The birth of my world occurred in 1999.
Hmm.
So I was 2 years into being an armor officer, and I think you were at Harvard Law.
Yeah.
And the two of us and your brother Willie and Newton,
Hmm.
also from the Grey Brotherhood, we kind of put our heads together. We're thinking about building a fantasy role playing, or I shouldn't say
Yep.
fantasy, a role playing game.
Yep.
And we bandied around a bunch of different ideas. We looked at Norse, we looked at Iceland being, or not Iceland, but Antarctica being, off center and the world shifted. And we looked, I think, at some space games. And the
Yep.
one we spent the most time on was this fantasy world. Um, and we'd written all sorts of cool stuff, and we'd begun developing the early stages of it and how the cosmology worked, and we'd begun developing the societies and whatnot. And I was falling in love with it, and as at that point in time, I'm like, I'm going to write this great battle that we were all projecting to. And I wrote the battle, and you guys were like, hey, that's great. And at that point, that was actually the spark for me really to feel confident as a writer. And so that's when I started my writing career. In many ways, I'd been dabbling with it, but also that was when you came back and said, I did market research, and there's no way at this point, this is before Kickstarters and all those other kinds of things.
Hmm.
There's no way we can make any kind of life,
Money.
money doing this thing. And so we put the kibosh on it, and you went off
Yeah.
and did great things, and I continued my career and what have you. That world we developed though is my world.
That's right.
And
That's
so,
right.
you actually were involved in some of the founding parts of the magic system, because that, yeah, and I've only changed that a little. I would say it's probably 90% of what we developed back in
That's
'99,
amazing. That's awesome.
and then fleshed out and given because we didn't go into enough detail. But basically, it is. I describe it as, well, actually, trying to think of how the best way to describe it. Okay, so for one thing, and this was inspired by, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I've been wrong for 30 years. This is inspired in part by RuneCraft, which I think was Avalon Hill's only role playing game, which I've
Hmm.
never read. I've never read the rules, but somebody at some point, I think at West Point, said in RuneCraft, everyone has the capacity for magic. And
Yep.
I'm like, that's cool. I like that. And so in my world, everyone has the capacity for magic. Now, not everyone delves into it, which is, there actually aren't that many
Hmm.
sorcerers. I call them sorcerers in my world. There are not that many sorcerers because it takes a lot of effort and a lot of devotion
Hmm.
to do it, but there's the
Hmm.
capacity in everyone. And so the way magic works is there's three parts, and the main part is affinities. There are 8 affinities, which kind of are schools of magic would be a way to describe it.
Right.
And those actually were originally built around, we were building up stats, kind of like your strength, your con, your dex,
Yep.
and we developed these. We never decided if they were gods or angelic beings or what they were. Um, I don't think we ever solidified that, but they each were personifications of one of those schools of magic.
Right.
I have since made them, largely. Well, it depends on your scholarly view, but most Surastari believe them being more as angelic beings. There was one creator who created the world he shaped the world from nothing. Out of void, he brought, out of nothing he brought something, and then he said, "Okay, you 11,
Yeah.
U11 go and shape it. And so each of them came in and they did their various roles. And so there's a brother and sister who shaped the mountains and the valleys. There's a brother and sister who who did the oceans and the rivers. There's a brother and sister who did the winds and the rain. Um, and there's one does the stars. There's one who, various things, all those various things. And those form the 8 affinities. And so there's 4 which are
So okay,
elemental.
so your
Sorry.
explanation for the existence of evil then, and like like entropy in settings because women were involved.
I'm not going to go there. And 2, if you read my stories, I don't think you'll think that's true
All right.
because
I just wanted
I remember there was one point when you're reading the story, I was looking through the comments, just kind of prepping for remembering what your thoughts were on Tears from Iron. I read through it when you did your read through back in 2018, and one of your comments was, enough of this Vistus guy. I want to hear more about Nanana.
Yeah, I know. Nanana's my favorite character by far, for sure.
And she is the bridge character. She is going to be in all
favorite.
3 of the books. She is probably my favorite character too, I'll confess.
Yeah, I mean we're gonna change the series name to Chronicles of Nanana, and just each of the books is gonna have a picture of her, and she'll be wearing progressively less clothes in each of the 3 books. It's gonna be this is how we're gonna hit bestseller.
Well, the problem is I don't do scantily. I believe in realistic armor.
Nanana doesn't need armor. She kicks ass no matter what she's wearing.
Well, that's true. But so anyway, there are 4 elementals, and in fact, one of my friends who's reading through that, he's like, earth, fire, water, wind. That's kind of boring. You should and very earthy. You should come up with your own terms for it. And so eventually, along the way, that's one of the changes I made, as I call them. And I kind of create them like the world is a body. So water is the blood, wind is the breath, earth is the flesh, and fire is the heart. And so those are your elemental. I call them elementals. Kinds of magic, and I think of it as sort of as a spoke wheel. So like classically, you're going to have water as opposite fire and things of that sort.
Right.
And in between them, there are what I call the luminants, which isn't really the most precise name, but scholars don't have a good name for that. If I find a scholar and when I'm studying my world who has a good name for that, I might we might change it. But so between between fire and I'm a little bit rusty, but anyway, I'll just rattle them off because I'm forgetting where they are. This folks, but we have the beacon, which is light. It's the light of the heavens. And we have the veil, which is shadow. And so and the interesting thing, I've had a lot of fun kind of dabbling with the ideas of beacon and shadow and these other different kinds. Because there's the physical aspects of magic and there's also the mental aspects of magic. And I realized that, the veil, a lot of people think veil, but shadow magic, that's evil, that's bad. It's not. It is simply another school of magic. And it represents anything which involves creativity comes from the veil, because that's where ingenuity comes from. That's also, politicians are from the veil because they have to be deceptive. I mean, a good army commander knows when to lie to his troops and say, "This is awesome. Let's go charge and die on that hill." And his troops go, "Yay!" That is the veil in prime form. And that's important for successful battles oftentimes. Then we have the spark, which is the spark of life. And that's, that's your healing, that's your emboldening, that's where those kinds of things come from. And then opposite that, you have the void, which started when we were creating was death and darkness or something like that. And I created that to the void. That is what the creator pulled everything from. And so there's a question of, is the void actually a part of the magic cycle or not? And the void is evil. So the void is, those who are practitioners of the void are, they're violating the natural order. The best description I have for the void is it violates the rules of physics. So for example, the transfer of energy where, you light a fire and you burn up the tree, but it becomes heat, it becomes warmth, it becomes what have you. With the void, you don't convert wood into warmth.
Destroy.
It is gone. It is removed from creation. And so that can have devastating effects. And I explore that a little bit, not in Tears from Iron, but that comes into play in the sequel, as a major player later on. And so all the other 7 affinities are in conflict with the void, and their proximity to it actually relates to kind of what they are. The fire, the the heart of his fallenness. That's courage. That is the warrior. That is the fighter. Whereas earth or the flesh is the defender. So that's the shield, and those two are right next to it. And as they each move further down the spokes of the wheel, you get to the end, which is life, which is the antithesis of the void.
Right. Right.
And so that's kind of how the magic system's structured. It also varies. So that's affinities. There's also, not everyone is equally adept at magic. And so the one major, I think, innovation there, perhaps, I'm not sure if somebody else has used this or not, but the one major innovation there, I think, anyway, is that those who are very proficient in magic are very vulnerable to it. Those who have or I shouldn't say proficient, those who have high capacity for proficiency are very vulnerable to it. Those who have low capacity to it are invulnerable to it. In fact, there's a High Lord in the story. There's a brief allusion to this. His name is High Lord Tyrannus, and he cannot use magic, no matter how hard he tries, no matter if he spends 5,000 years studying it, he's not going to be able to cast a spell. But he is impervious to magic. Magic cannot hurt him, and so there is that scale of both potency and vulnerability that exists, and so that's basically how the magic system works.
So it's sort of like a normal person will be attracted to a hot woman and have some game at talking to her, and then like a really extroverted person will be attracted, but he'll also be like, kind of vulnerable to her allure. Whereas if you're like a sufficiently introverted autist, then like you're just oblivious to it, right? And so like you're immune entirely from like the nefarious charms of these people. Right.
You have no magic, but you can't be hurt by it either.
But you can't be hurt by it, right? Okay, I totally get that. I totally get that. That makes.
Well, between that one and the humans being beastmen, I'm going to have to relook at the whole philosophy of.
We're exploring your dark side, Jonathan. We're exploring.
I love the beastmen one. That's fantastic.
The humans with beastmen. I know. It's true. They do. They're terrible people in your books. Prude and primitive. They're constantly causing problems for the
noble and perfect Surastar.
Noble and perfect elves. I know. I'm telling you guys, if you like elves, you got to read this because this is true. Dan Vince, this book is for you if you're still on the chat. Brian says, fascinating. Given the dualistic cosmos, how is the classic problem of good being preferable when evil is also a substance surmounted? Okay, so Brian is asking a question. So I don't know. Is evil a substance? It seems like it's not a substance. Right?
It's actually it would be like anti-substance.
Anti-substance. Yeah.
Because you're essentially destroying creation, and so those who use void magic. I also should another important part of this is magic is completely oral. It is the written word. You have to understand what you're saying. So if somebody just says magic words and has no clue what they're saying, it's meaningless. You have to understand what you're saying. You have to understand the meaning. You have to focus on it, but you have to say the words. And the more precisely you say the words, the greater understanding of those words, the more effective you can be, which is why you have to practice. But also the whole oral tradition and the ability, because it's a language, and if you know how to speak it, is why it kind of converts to some degree, mostly to spell singing and ACKS.
Yeah.
So let me see. Going back to the void question. So I sort of lost my train of thought. Let me see. So
is the void?
Oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so the way void magic works is because you are a creature of substance. You are a creature of existence. You are flesh. You are soul. You are spirit. And you are now dabbling in this thing, which is the antithesis of that has an effect on you. And what it does is the more you use it, the more you exude this aura of this heebie-jeebie, I guess.
Heebie-jeebie. Yeah. Totally.
I convey it in nicer terms in the story, but essentially it's heebie-jeebie. It's more described as this shadow, this darkness lingering. This you get goosebumps when you're around somebody like this.
Yep.
And the more they do it, the more pronounced it becomes. They can suppress it, by an act of will. They can reduce that impact and hide their true nature for a while, but you eventually get tired, and boom. Of course, it also has some significant positive effects if you're trying to terrify everyone around you. You're very successly in doing that. But yeah,
is it so? You said people to have different affinities to the different things. So is it possible that like Bob just happens to have a really big affinity to the void, so when he goes to study magic, he kind of is like, wow, I guess I'm kind of just like metaphysically a jerk, and then just leans into that? I mean, is it say
That's
does it say something about his morality, or is it just that's just how he was born, man? He was,
that's a good question. The scholars are still studying that. The treatise that the best treatise I found is by this actually a Sarastari woman called Urpitha, who you will meet in the next book. But she did a study on the nature of magic, and she consulted with Madrunath, who is one of the major sorceresses of
right.
Tears from Iron. And her best interpretation of that is for those who have an affinity to the void, what they actually have is a greater resistance to the void. And so if
Uh,
they delve into it, then they lose that resistance and become, more adept at it. The problem is that generally the void is considered by all races, creeds, peoples to be
right.
the antithesis of life. And so if you find a void sorcerer, they tend to die. and so
Uh,
and experimentation is discouraged. And so there's not a whole lot known. So that's one theory. Another theory is that that nobody starts that way, but as you dabble with it, you begin to shift and lose your old affinity. But they're
uh,
not entirely certain of how that works.
right. And you can't
So
really study it without sort of because it's like how do you learn about the
right,
dark side without
right,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah. But
yeah.
it does have solutions for. Now, I will spoiler for all those dwarf fans out there. There are no dwarves in my story. Prior to reading Axe, I'm sorry. Prior to reading By This Axe, I never cared for the dwarves.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Actually, so funnily enough, Jonathan, one of the legacies of our work back in 1999 was that when I first started the RN Empire, which was 2007, there were no dwarves. The dwarves there they had used to exist and they went extinct, and so there were no dwarves. But I eventually relented and added dwarves back in because of the constant demands from the dwarf lovers, and then eventually even halflings slipped in despite
yeah,
my better
I was amazed
judgment.
when you sold out to halflings. If I
Yeah,
recall, the original Explorer template was based off of the old halfling template. If I recall.
it was. It was. Explorers
Yeah.
were there, so I didn't have to put halflings in. That's correct.
But anyway, so there are four races. Some of them I've explored in greater depth than others. But one of the races is called the Ite, and you do meet those in the sequel. And they are a cursed race. They are a nocturnal people. I find them. I actually really enjoy them.
Yeah.
um, but they're cursed, and they're cursed in creation. Because Sidion, who plays your devil figure, he is the one of the. So there's the creator being. He's called his highest above by most peoples, and then there are these Atini who are called. That means the first. They're the 11,
Right.
and then there's a subgroup, or it's debatable whether they're actually sub or not. They're more specialized,
Right.
including among those specialized were the ones who actually shaped the four races. And Sidion was one of the. He was the lower. He was one of the brothers and sisters. He was fire, and he
Mm,
created the fires inside of the earth. And his sister created the sun. But he grew covetous of the world. He's like, I want this to be mine. And so he began corrupting things to make it undesirable for everyone else.
mm.
And that's kind of where our fall comes in the
And we
story.
can see the
And
influence of the Silmarillion in that for sure, right?
certainly, and also Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. But like Iluvatar and the Valar and whatnot and the
Yeah,
Maiar.
that part definitely, because I mean, being I'm being Christian and wanting to write, in
Fantasy.
beliefs I believe in. I didn't want to really have the pantheons of the Greeks, the Romans. They're interesting, but they never really appealed to me.
Mm,
And so I like the idea of having this higher being. And Tolkien solved it, and so I kind of doubled down. Now
absolutely.
my higher beings are much more involved in the world than Tolkien's are. They live and work and be exist among the people, but they all die off at the end of the Cataclysm. They're all slain. All 11 of them die, and so now the world is without them, and so now there's some even metaphysical questions of, do they still exist? Are they in heaven? Are they in,
Oh
it's
wow.
called
So
paradise? Are they in paradise? Can they still influence the world? Are
so
they
they're all
deities?
dead at the start of book
Mhm.
one.
Oh yeah, they're 1,000 years dead.
They're a
In fact,
thousand years. So
their deaths caused the cataclysm.
their
The
deaths are what
unleashing of the power of their being is
right.
what caused the cataclysm.
That's pretty epic.
So boy, I keep losing my train of thought. I used to be
It's all
better at
right.
this. I'm getting old.
So
Oh yeah, but so there's this one race. They're called the Idhe. Funny story with them. Let's see if I can keep on track. I originally called. So I've always been fascinated by like the Gaelic she.
Mm-hmm.
Sidhe. And so very
Yep.
early on in my writing, I'm like, okay, I want to come up with another race. I'm going to take off the S and I'm going to call them the Idhe, Idhe. And I
Nice.
didn't, and you read things, and I have so many words I don't know how to pronounce because I read and I don't
Yeah,
know how
yeah.
they're pronounced. And so I was in a group and somebody was reading and they said, "Oh, so these are the he."
Yep.
I'm like,
Yep.
I'm like,
Yep.
no, they're the Ihe. And so I
Yep.
changed the pronunciation, so it's now IE apostrophe DHAE.
Nice.
So they're still the Idhe. I kind of like that name, but they're this cursed race because Sidon was corrupting and he was trying to draw power. And so what he did was he tainted the souls of not the souls, but the life spirit of these people. Well, maybe it's the souls. There's still some philosophical debate on that
Right.
among
Right.
scholars. But basically, what happens is these poor people they live to about age 30, and at age 30 they get afflicted by this wasting death, and every single one of them dies.
Sucks.
Nobody lives past the first 30 or so years, and the deaths aren't very good. They're not nice deaths, and so they've resolved different parts of their culture have resolved different ways of dealing with death. They of course have different family structures because nobody lives to see their kids grow up. And
Wow.
so there's a whole handing off to siblings or to uncles and aunts and all that kind of structure. But there's a
Wow.
great incentive amongst their shaper, who's she is one of the second tier. So the first tier, the Atini, all died out, but there's some of the second tiers who are still around.
Right.
And their shaper is very concerned by this, and so she begins dabbling in this void magic where they learn how to take the
Ah,
life power out of others to prolong their lives, and so they're life stealers, if you will.
got it.
That is completely not in Tears from Iron, but we do explore that in the sequel.
Well, who can
But
blame them? I mean, that would suck, right? Like, I would totally study void magic if I was limited to a 30-year lifespan.
it
So,
creates interesting moral challenges, and that's kind of acts 4 through 6 of the next
got it.
of
Yeah.
the next series.
So, I
Deal with
actually
that.
only found out that she is pronounced she over the weekend.
Oh,
You know,
really?
a whole lot. Did not know. Always pronounced it city.
Yeah.
Um, and so the way I found out was I'm working on the elf book, the Before All Others, and I'm like looking up these Irish monsters, and I encounter a monster, and it's the Beansidhe. Okay, and Bean in Old Irish or whatever is woman, and then Sidhe is fairy, so it's the woman fairy, and I'm reading about it, and it's like, and it shows up as a harbinger of death, and it has this keening wail, and and then people die when they hear the keening wail, and I'm like, oh, so it's like a banshee. Oh no. And so then I'm like, ChatGPT, how is Sidhi pronounced? And it's like, oh, Sidhi is pronounced she. And I'm like, how is bean pronounced? Bean is pronounced ban. So bean Sidhi would be banshee. And I'm like, really? And so then it turns out, so like there's another one I'm working on, which is like, I'm like, the Kate Sidhi, which is like, the fairy cat. It's like, yeah, that's the cat she. Right.
Yeah,
And
when
then
they
there's
translated banshee into Banshee, I think they did all of us a disservice.
or a favor, right? Then
Or
there's
maybe
like
a favor.
a dog. It's like then there was the CU with a little sign hyphen SIDHE, and I'm like, it's the Q Sidhe. I'm like, ChatGPT, how is this pronounced? That's the coochie. Okay, right.
I
It's a
gotta say
coochie.
though, I love the Elvish language. I'm sorry, not Elvish, Welsh language. That a Freudian slip? I don't know, but I love the Welsh language. I had an opportunity to go. I've actually been to Wales twice. And when a friend of mine and I we did a whirlwind trip. We were there a week and we circled Wales completely and we saw like 25 castles.
Oh,
We were
that's
crazy.
awesome. Yeah.
And some Welsh people like, why don't you just linger? It's like we only got 7 days. We got to see castles. But some of their castle names are just and the way they pronounce things is
Hilarious.
really interesting. But they have the best. If you ever want to see beautiful castles, go to
I bet.
Wales.
I bet. Yeah.
Um,
I've
Both
heard
of
that.
the original Welsh castles are fantastic, and then also the Edwardian ones that he built
Yeah.
when he was trying to subjugate Wales. Um,
Yeah.
you get kind of
Awesome.
two flavors. You get that really early Middle Age,
Castle.
medieval era
Right.
castles largely from the Welsh. Like Drizzleoin is one, which looks like Drisselwyn, but it's pronounced Drizzleoin.
Oh, wow.
um,
Yeah.
and then you get my favorite one is probably Conwy on the northern side. It's your standard castle on a rock overlooking
Yeah.
a river, and it's just fantastic.
Awesome. I haven't gotten to do
Yeah,
any great travel like that in a long time.
no.
Yeah. Well, I recently discovered. Did you know that Scots is like is a language? I just discovered this again. Like it was a huge gaping hole in my knowledge base. So because you've got Irish Gaelic and
Right.
Scottish Gaelic, both of which descended from Old Irish, right? Then you've got
Mhm.
Welsh and Bretonian and Manx, and they all descended and sort of then you go back one step further, and then they're all the Celtic origin languages, right? So there's like the two
Right.
trees. But then there's this other language they speak in Scotland, which is called Scot. And Scots is spoken in lowland um,
Okay.
Scotland, whereas Scottish Gaelic is spoken in Highland, um, which I had no idea. So Scots it sounds a lot like English, but it's its own language. It's not actually a dialect of English. It's got its own spelling, but it's very similar to English.
Oh, interesting.
And
I don't think I knew that.
I didn't know that either. So like all my life, I've thought when people wrote this way, that they were kind of like, they were doing like that snooty Victorian thing when you would like write people with an accent, you would write them in funny ways. Um, and it's like, no, actually, this is an entirely it's its own language. So like I was having Chat GPT teach me Scots, right? And so it's like, uh, uh, you know, um, I didn't ken where ye put it, or another
The good
one.
news is I think I can understand that one. Unless it's talking about dinner, then I'm really confused.
Yeah, so I dinner ken where you put it is I don't know where you've put it, and
Yeah.
then we've got the bairns are playing ootby, which is those children are always playing outside,
I'm trying
and
to remember.
then
I've seen bairns a lot. There's like My Wee Bairns comes from, I think it's
yeah
an
yeah
old
yeah
book.
like
Ah,
so
and I
apparently
was always confused by bairns, but
it was
yeah,
a
it's
major
yeah.
language of literature in the early part of the 20th century and the 19th century. Yeah, and then we got we'll hate to gang to the school of the morn, which means we'll have to go to the school tomorrow, whatever. So it's like it's got its own grammar, its own spelling, but it's like mutually understandable with English. So yeah. Anyway, mind
That's
blown.
interesting. It's interesting that I mean, because I think the Scottish and English influences I mean, the Highlands was a huge geographic divider, which would have, huge potential linguistic and other cultural barriers.
Yeah.
But there's
Yeah.
not really that division other than, like the Hadrian's Wall kind of a thing,
Right.
the Roman influence. But post-Roman, there wasn't really any geographical reason why they would intermix. So it's surprising that it survived as a distinct language.
It is surprising. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fascinating.
So yeah. So I've decided that like it's a broad day of the day, is it no? Like it's fantastic. I love it. I want to learn Scots now.
What's
Um
broad mean?
fine. Fine.
Fine, okay.
Yeah.
I got the rest of
Br-
it.
Yeah.
'Cause I mean, it could be bad or good. Without
Yeah. So
context.
bra means fine. Fair means really. So he was fair scunnered with the whole thing, means he was really fed up with the whole thing. I'm fair chuffed with myself, means I'm really pleased with myself. Um, yeah. So fair means really, and dinna means don't know. Nah means not. Yeah. Anyway, totally. Well,
Wow.
I'm kind of curious. Like people listening to this chat, did you guys know about the existence of Scots? Because it really is genuinely new to me. Like I feel like I've been an ignoramus my whole life with regard to Scottish language now. So if you knew about Scots, please say so. Yeah.
So far as that goes, I've been thinking about every once in a while I dabble with different parts of my world and I want to flesh them out more, and I get sidetracked and like, okay, I need to rope myself in and whatnot. But one of the things I've always wanted to shore up more is the language, or at least the language of the Siristari, and then the language of the magic. The
Yeah.
magic is fairly established, but with the Siristari in particular, I've been reading a lot or listening to, actually. I'm one of those guys who likes to listen to things more. I find it much easier than reading. Although I do both. I have both. But I've been listening to a lot of ancient history,
Hmm.
foundations of civilization stuff, and that the Sumerians, they had their languages actually was, I think it's called glottal. You might know better than I, but it's syllabic. Maybe kind of like Japanese. I know Japanese is
Mm,
syllabic, um,
yeah.
and where originally each sound had its own symbol. and had their own meanings, and they gradually combined into each other. And so
Oh,
if
you
I
mean
ever go back and
agglutinative?
yes, there we go. Thank you. Agglutinative. I knew there was a G in there somewhere.
Yeah,
As
agglutinative.
opposed to most languages in the world, which are oh good heavens, the other word.
There's inflected and isolated.
Inflective.
Yeah.
Yeah, inflective I think is most. But anyway, the agglutinative languages. I mean, if I ever get back into trying to resolve that in finer detail, I think I'm going to try to make Siristari agglutinative. Go back
Okay.
and reverse engineer things.
Right.
But first, I need to figure out how to completely engineer my world into ACKS, and I'm working on that a little bit too, trying to see how I can make the magic system function because it's similar, and your magic building rules were really helpful for that. I mean, I for the longest time I thought these are two completely foreign concepts, but then I was reading the Spellsinger rules, and I'm like, this is actually possible.
Yeah, I think you would do it
Um,
instead of it like being blast and death and whatever, you would just do it as like void, fire, beacon, etc. You know, you build the effects for each, and then you would spell
right.
sing from there. Yeah.
The biggest challenge though is of course that somebody who knows language can do anything, so it's very spell singing.
Right.
And the other challenge is trying to figure out what to weed out. For example, there is no summoning, there is no other plane to draw things from in my world,
Right. Right.
and most of the movement is also doesn't exist. There is no,
No
you know,
teleportation.
yeah, teleportation is all sorts of fun. Flying is all sorts of fun. Jordan does interesting things with it, and I think he does it well.
Yeah,
But it completely breaks tactics.
it
And I
does.
think he even handles I think he even handles how it breaks tactics well.
It
He
does. Yeah.
develops whole new tactical systems on it, and I remember towards the end, I don't think he ever made it to the end, but towards the end, they actually figure out they can make a hole in this. They can look down and make the portal, and they look through the portal. They're in their command tent, and they can look through the portal, and they open up this window in the sky, so they can actually look down on a battlefield. So it's like they're playing
Oh
like
wow.
they're playing domains at war. And of course, you
Oh
can shoot
wow.
back,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know those. So he thinks about it, and he does a really good job with that, I think. But I really like the idea of, army has to march,
Me
and
too.
there's a certain distance
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. So I have removed, or I shouldn't say removed. I don't have most of the movement capacities.
Yeah, so Negative Space brought this up. So Absolute's going to be still working on the exact licensing terms, but I want people to be able to play with ACKS II. And in fact, Jonathan and I have talked about him doing a supplement for ACKS for his world. I think he needs to kind of finish the next novel and continue to build that out. One of the things, interesting enough, one of the things we learned in publishing this is that Amazon really rewards you for having a sequel and kind of punishes you if you don't, in terms of like the algorithm. And so, because like the way you get users is you have like, you put it on Kindle Unlimited, you get them to read book 1 and then they buy book 2. And if you don't have a book 2, they're like, well, that was a great Kindle Unlimited read. So we got to get book 2, get book 2 published, and then book 3. So
And then we actually have an interesting solution to book 2, which I think you came up with, and it solves some of my other challenges. And that is, we're not going to be publishing it as a book. In fact, it's long enough. It's actually about 2.5 books long. And
yeah,
so what we're doing is we're publishing it in serial, and so it's going to be 8 acts. Where originally because like I said, it's a stranded army story, so it's an army marching. It's kind of like the Mediterranean, like you have Oropos. I think
yep,
that's your lake, right?
that's
Mine is
mine. Yep.
called the Osingian Ocean, the Osingian Sea, which is a reference. Osingian is a reference to Henji, who is the goddess of waters, and she has the most epic death, perhaps of all the deaths of all the higher beings. And and
So she
um,
was my player character then.
no, but all one of the most popular curses in my world is Hinji's blood on the bridge, because she dies on this bridge over a chasm, holding off the hordes of darkness, and she fights for like a week all by herself.
Yeah,
And so it's like,
as
if
you
there's going
do.
to be an epic way to go, that's the epic way to
That's
go.
the epic way to go for sure.
But anyway, so yeah, so it's called the Osingian Sea, and so they're stranded on the southern side, and so they're marching through desert trying to get back home.
Right.
And so
Oof.
I had all sorts of fun inspirations looking at deserts,
Yep.
studying Egypt and Tunisia and whatnot. And my fascination, my World War II fascination was with the Western Desert
Of
in
course.
particular.
Absolutely. Rommel. Yeah.
Um, and so I gotta dabble into some of that. But yeah, so as I was writing this and I was getting through my story, I had all these benchmarks, and I'm like, all right, I'm having great success. This is awesome. I'm writing the story I want to tell, but wow, they got a long ways to go. I can't get them back in
Yeah,
a normal book length time
yeah,
period. It's like, okay, I need to split this into 2 books. And then I was like, you know what? And then I have this home front thing, which is fairly involved. And one of my readers, when they're reading through it, they're like, I feel fairly disconnected to it. I'm like, okay, that needs to have its own act. And
yeah,
so this whole serial thing sort of solves it, where so the 3 acts are kind of like the original first book, and then there's 3 more acts of the second series. So yeah,
yeah,
so the first 3 is primarily their war against the hero star. The next 3 is their war against the void, um, and then there's a home front act, which gets into all sorts of traitorous shenanigans, and then there is the final confrontation when he reaches home and not everything is as it was when he left.
yeah.
And so that's kind of the concept. But that way we'll be able to release it in 8. But I don't want
Absolutely.
to pull a trick like some authors pull. I want to have a complete story for you before I roll it out. so
Yes, very important.
um,
Very important.
so I'm going to make sure I have it all finished and polished, and then we'll hit the go button and we'll roll them out. And probably I think you were talking maybe about a month apart or something like that.
Yeah,
In
we were
fairly
saying
short
month or
order.
2 months or something like that. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
timing on the algorithm crusts. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Hey,
each one of them will be probably 60 to 90,000 words.
right, right. It's
So
hilarious. Like, yeah, it's an entire novel, but no, it's just if you can
I do write big books.
on your end, pull back up the Amazon page for your book. I want to toss
Oh,
that up. While you're doing that, I'm going to toss up this for a moment. So for those of you guys who haven't heard, the ACKS II Treasure Tome is coming. 1,000 magic items compiled for use with Adventurer Conqueror King System. It's launching October 28th, so please sign up to be notified on launch. We'll drop the link into the description. We'll also drop the link to Jonathan's book into the description here. Not in the description, but the chat. Yeah. And then we can, don't forget, so Tears from Iron, Memories of the Cataclysm, Book 1, now available, paperback, Kindle, and as of literally like an hour before we did this, became available in an audiobook. So whatever format you prefer to consume your books, you can now do that. And I really want to say, like, Tears from Iron is awesome. I don't say that just because Jonathan is my friend, because I have other friends that are writers, and I just don't invite them on the show. Tears from Iron is a really great novel with a great payoff. So I hope you guys will check it out. I guess that's all right. That's 11. We had a schedule for an hour and a half. Jonathan, anything you want to close out? Tell folks.
yeah. Also, I have in an attempt. I'm one of those authors who would love to write and just not have to try to sell anything, but I want people to read, and so I'm gradually working on improving my profile, and so I actually have started a YouTube channel. Um, and so I've released one video now talking about how boring combat is in fantasy books these days and solutions to that. So I'm also going to release some more on the book itself and some on writing and some on fantasy. I got one on talking about monsters and the role of monsters in humanoids and humans that I'm probably releasing within the next month, things like that. And I also have a Substack, which will, if you subscribe to that, like I said, if you're interested in seeing what my world is like for free, you'll get a link to a copy of my background world. So those are other places you can find me.
I have dropped them. I've dropped them all into the chat here for those of you watching on the chat, and I'll get them into the description of the video as well. So,
And of course, every 2 weeks or so, depending upon the release cycle on the Adventures of the Grey Brotherhood, you'll find us there too in our shenanigans.
that's right. There's shenanigans, there's hijinks, there's exploits, and a lot of really bad die rolls. So can't miss it. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate it. This is Axe to Grind, episode 3. At some point, I guess I should actually sign up for premium StreamYard, so I stop getting the stupid little powered by StreamYard glyph, which tells everyone that I'm an amateur. So at some point I will do that, but today is not that day, as Tolkien says. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining today. Everyone in general, please keep all the folks in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida in your prayers. Big hurricane hit, another big hurricane on its way. So please keep them in your thoughts and prayers as and we'll prepare an emergency shipment of Kindle books to them. That doesn't make sense. Anyway, okay. All right. We're going to sign off now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.